The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, though Daniel Murphy would later think it strange that he remembered such a small detail about the day that changed everything. He sat in his office at the Earth Council headquarters in Geneva, reviewing supply reports for the outer colonies, when his communication terminal blinked with an urgent priority signal. The symbol that appeared on his screen made him sit up straight. It was the seal of the Galactic Council, a flowing design that represented all 47 member species united in peace. Daniel was 52 years old and had spent 30 years in various positions of leadership. He had commanded military operations during the corporate wars, negotiated trade agreements between rival Earth nations, and spent the last 5 years managing humanity's relationship with the galactic community. He thought he had seen everything. He was wrong. The message was formal and elegant, translated into human languages by systems far more advanced than anything Earth possessed. The Galactic Council requested the presence of a human delegation at a peace summit on Kelvar Prime. A territorial dispute between two species, the Draxan Collective and the Altair Union, required mediation. As the newest members of the Council, humans were invited to observe and potentially offer their perspective as neutral parties. The summit would begin in 3 weeks. Daniel read the message 3 times, then called his team. Within an hour, his office was crowded with the people who would form the delegation. Lisa Chang arrived first. She was 38 and brilliant, with degrees in xenobiology and cultural studies. She had spent the last decade studying the 47 known species, learning their languages and customs. If anyone could help humans navigate alien diplomacy, it was Lisa. Jack Barnes came next, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone trained for combat. At 35, he had retired from Special Forces and now served as security chief for diplomatic missions. He said little, but his eyes were always moving, always assessing. Kate Sullivan, the youngest human ambassador to the Galactic Council at 41, arrived with her assistant carrying files about the Draxan and Altair species. Marcus Webb, the chief engineer, completed the group. At 44, he had designed half the ships in Earth's small fleet and would be responsible for getting them to Kelvar Prime and back. They spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Lisa created detailed briefings on every species they might encounter. The Varnathi resembled tall birds with colorful feathers that changed shade with their emotions. The Kellan were aquatic beings with transparent skin showing glowing organs inside their bodies. The Zerath were living crystals that communicated through light patterns. The list went on, each species more different from humans than the last. What struck Daniel most during these briefings was how fragile the other species seemed. Most came from worlds with gravity lower than Earth's. Their bones were lighter, their muscles weaker. Some could barely survive in Earth's atmosphere without assistance. Lisa explained that Earth was considered a harsh world by galactic standards. Higher gravity, more extreme weather, more dangerous life forms. Humans had evolved to survive conditions that would kill most aliens within hours. Jack focused on security, though Lisa gently reminded him that the galactic community had not experienced a violent crime in over a century. Their ships did not carry weapons. Their stations had no defenses. The concept of physical threat was almost alien to them. Jack nodded but continued his preparations anyway. Old habits died hard. Kate studied the dispute between the Draxan and Altair. It seemed almost trivial to her. Both species claimed historical rights to a small cluster of star systems called the Epsilon Cluster. The Draxan said their ancestors had mapped those stars 6,000 years ago. The Altair countered that they had maintained scientific stations there for 2,000 years. Neither side had actually fought over it. They were just arguing and had been arguing for decades. Marcus prepared the ship, a vessel called Endeavor. It was one of Earth's newer diplomatic ships, sleek and fast, though still primitive compared to alien technology. Marcus had built redundancy into every system. Backup power, backup life support, backup navigation. When Lisa asked why, he shrugged and said it was how humans built things. They planned for failure because failure was always possible. The journey to Kelvar Prime took 2 weeks. The ship jumped through hyperspace using coordinates provided by the Galactic Council. During the trip, Lisa held daily briefings. She taught them basic phrases in the trade language most species used. She explained diplomatic protocols. Never touch a Varnathi's feathers. Never look directly at a Zerath's core. Never ask a Kellan about their breeding cycles. The list of rules seemed endless. Daniel spent his evenings reviewing Earth's history files. He read about wars and conflicts, about how humans had solved territorial disputes in the past. Most solutions involved either negotiation or force, and usually a combination of both. He wondered how species that had forgotten violence solved their problems. He did not share these thoughts with the others. When they finally arrived at Kelvar Prime, Daniel felt his breath catch. The planet was beautiful beyond description. Vast oceans of crystal-clear water surrounded floating cities that seemed to defy gravity. Elegant bridges connected structures that looked more like art than architecture. Everything gleamed in the light of the system's blue sun. The Endeavour received docking instructions and settled onto a landing platform near the Grand Harmony Hall, where the summit would take place. As they disembarked, Daniel noticed how the artificial gravity felt lighter than Earth normal. His team moved carefully, adjusting to the change. Around them, alien beings floated and glided with effortless grace. The humans were greeted by a Varnathi named Sarishal, who served as the summit's chief mediator. Sarishal was tall and elegant, with feathers that shifted from deep blue to purple as they spoke. Their voice was soft and musical, barely above a whisper. They welcomed the humans and expressed hope that Earth's unique perspective would help bring peace to the Epsilon Cluster dispute. As they walked through the halls toward their quarters, Daniel became increasingly aware of how different humans looked compared to everyone else. The other species moved like dancers, light and graceful. Humans walked with heavy steps, their muscles built for a world that fought back. Aliens stared at them with expressions Daniel could not read. Some seemed curious, others seemed nervous. That evening, there was a reception for all the delegates. The hall was filled with beings from across the galaxy. The Draxan representatives looked like large insects with philosophical eyes. The Altair resembled floating jellyfish with tendrils of light. Species Daniel had only seen in files now stood before him in living color. Kate made the rounds, introducing herself and exchanging pleasantries. Her voice, though she tried to keep it low, seemed loud in the quiet hall. Several aliens flinched at the sound. She noticed and spoke even more softly, almost mouthing the words. The translation devices struggled to pick up her whispers. Lisa spoke with a Kellen scholar about Earth's oceans. The conversation was pleasant but strange. The Kellen took several minutes to form each thought, speaking in long, flowing sentences that circled around ideas rather than stating them directly. Lisa found herself growing impatient and had to consciously slow down her responses. Jack stood near a wall watching everything. He noticed that none of the aliens carried anything that could be used as a weapon. No tools, no devices that looked dangerous, nothing. The hull had no security checkpoints, no guards, no emergency exits that he could see. It made him deeply uncomfortable, though he could not explain why. A world without threats should have felt safe. Instead, it felt exposed. Daniel watched his team and the aliens around them. He saw the gaps between species, the fundamental differences that went beyond biology. These beings had built a civilization on peace and cooperation. They had forgotten what it meant to fight, to struggle, to compete for survival. Humans remembered. Humans had never stopped remembering. As the reception ended and the delegates retired to their quarters, Daniel stood alone for a moment, looking out at the glowing cities of Kelvar Prime. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that coming here might have been a mistake. He pushed the thought away. Humanity had been invited to join the galactic community. They had been given a chance to prove themselves. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Tomorrow, the Peace Summit would begin. Tomorrow, humans would show the galaxy what they could do. Daniel just hoped that would turn out to be a good thing. The second day of the summit began with what the aliens called opening deliberations. Daniel and his team entered the Grand Harmony Hall to find it transformed. The space was enormous, with ceiling that stretched up into darkness and walls that seemed to shift colors with the mood of the room. Seats were arranged in a vast circle, with each species given a section decorated in their cultural style. The human section was simple and functional, which somehow made it stand out more than the elaborate designs around it. Sarishal opened the session with a speech about unity and understanding. It took 40 minutes. Their voice was so soft and soothing that Daniel found himself fighting to stay alert. Around the circle, other delegates sat in perfect stillness, absorbing every word. Humans shifted in their seats, crossed and uncrossed their legs, and tried not to look bored. Then the Draxan representative began their presentation. They were called Zexnor, and they moved to the center of the circle with slow, deliberate steps. What followed was not a speech, but a performance. Holographic images appeared in the air, showing ancient star charts and historical records. Zexnor did not just speak about their claim to the Epsilon cluster. They danced it, their body movements representing the journey of their ancestors through space, the discovery of those systems, the spiritual significance of the stars. It was beautiful. It was artistic. It took 4 hours. Daniel watched as the presentation covered the Draxan exploration of the cluster 6,000 years ago. Their mapping of every planet, their poems about the stars, their philosophical treatises on what those worlds meant to their understanding of the universe. By the time Zexnor finished, Daniel knew more about Draxan poetry than about why they actually wanted the territory. The Altair representative went next. They were called Luminara, and they floated in the center of the circle, their tendrils creating patterns of light. Their presentation was equally elaborate. They showed scientific data from their research stations in the Epsilon cluster. They displayed discoveries made over 2,000 years. They explained in intricate detail how their people had studied every asteroid, every moon, every particle of space dust in those systems. Another 4 hours passed. Daniel glanced at his team. Lisa was taking notes, but even she looked overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information. Kate was trying to identify any concrete claims in the flowery language. Jack was staring at the ceiling, probably counting the light fixtures. Marcus had his eyes closed, though Daniel was not sure if he was thinking deeply or sleeping. When the session finally ended for the day, the human delegation retreated to their private quarters. The room was comfortable, designed by aliens trying to accommodate human needs. It was close but not quite right, like a picture painted by someone who had never actually seen the subject. Kate was the first to speak. She said that after 8 hours of presentations, she still could not identify a single concrete reason why either species wanted the Epsilon cluster. There were no valuable resources mentioned. No strategic importance, no practical purpose. Just history and art and philosophy. Daniel agreed. He pointed out that neither side had even suggested a solution. They just kept stating their positions over and over, expecting everyone else to somehow magically find an answer. Lisa reminded them that galactic species thought differently than humans. These civilizations were thousands of years old. They did not rush. A dispute that had lasted decades was nothing to them. What seemed like stalling to humans was actually their normal pace of diplomacy. Kate argued that at this rate the summit would last years before any decision was reached. Lisa shrugged and said that was probably the plan. Jack mentioned something else that had been bothering him. He had been watching the Draxan and Altair representatives closely. Despite supposedly being on the brink of conflict, they showed no signs of actual hostility. They did not avoid each other. They did not exchange harsh words. They seemed almost friendly. He asked what kind of war was fought by people who liked each other. Daniel did not have an answer. That night, Daniel made a decision. He requested permission to address the council the following day. He told his team that humanity needed to contribute something meaningful to these talks, and the best thing humans could offer was clarity. They would cut through the artistic presentations and philosophical debates. They would propose an actual solution. Kate warned him that being too direct might offend the other species, but Daniel said they had to try. Humans were invited here for their perspective, so they would give it. The next morning, Daniel stood in the center of the Grand Harmony Hall. Every delegate was present. 47 species represented. Thousands of eyes watching him. Sarishal had granted him time to speak, though their feathers had shifted to a worried orange color when Daniel explained what he wanted to do. Daniel began with the proper diplomatic courtesies, thanking the hosts and acknowledging the complexity of the situation. Then he got to the point. He said that both the Draxan and Altair had legitimate claims to the Epsilon cluster. The Draxan had historical and cultural connections to those systems. The Altair had established infrastructure and scientific investments. Both deserved recognition. However, continuing to debate which claim was superior would solve nothing. They needed a practical solution. Daniel activated a holographic display he had prepared with Marcus. It showed the Epsilon cluster with clean, simple graphics. No poetry, no philosophy, just stars and planets. He proposed partitioning the territory. Systems with historical Draxan sites would go to the Draxan. Systems with established Altair stations would go to the Altair. The remaining disputed systems in the middle would become a joint development zone, administered by both species equally under council oversight. He explained his reasoning briefly. The historical systems had no current infrastructure, so giving them to the Draxon cost the Altair nothing practical. The developed systems were economically valuable to the Altair, and the Draxon had no immediate use for them. The middle systems were genuinely contested, so joint administration was fair. The whole proposal was designed to give each side what they actually needed, while making both compromise on what they merely wanted. The entire presentation took 14 minutes. Daniel finished, thanked the council for their attention, and returned to his seat. The hall was completely silent. Not the peaceful silence of meditation, but the shocked silence of disbelief. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The colors in the room seemed to dim. Finally, Sarishal spoke. Their voice was even quieter than usual, almost trembling. They asked Daniel how he had reached his conclusions so quickly. Daniel explained his methodology. He had analyzed the resource distribution of each system, assessed their strategic value, evaluated their economic potential, and cross-referenced that data with the historical and cultural claims presented yesterday. Then he had applied a standard framework for territorial partition, based on balancing competing interests. It was basic conflict resolution. Any human negotiator would have done the same. The silence that followed was even deeper. Daniel looked around and realized that something was very wrong. Delegates were staring at him with expressions he could not identify. Some had moved back in their seats, as if trying to increase the distance between themselves and the humans. The Varnathi's feathers had turned a dark, muddy color. The Kellan's internal lights were flickering. Even the crystalline Zerath seemed dimmer. A delegate from a species called the Primnel, who looked like a small furry mammal, raised a shaking paw. They asked, in a voice barely picked up by the translators, how Daniel could talk about strategic value and resource analysis as if he were planning military operations. Daniel started to explain that strategic thinking applied to all kinds of negotiations, not just military ones, but several delegates stood and left the chamber. Within minutes, half the assembly had found excuses to depart. Sarishal called a recess, suggesting that everyone take time to process the human proposal. As the hall emptied, Daniel stood with his team, confused and concerned. Kate asked what had just happened. Lisa looked pale. She said that humans had just revealed something about themselves, and the galaxy had not liked what it saw. That evening, Lisa received a message requesting a private meeting. The sender was a Kellan scholar named Verath, who taught xenopsychology at one of the galaxy's most prestigious universities. Lisa agreed to meet and brought Daniel with her. They met in a small garden outside the main complex, where water flowed in patterns that defied Earth physics. Verath floated before them, their tendrils moving in agitated patterns. They spoke carefully, choosing words with obvious difficulty. They explained that the other delegates were disturbed by the human presentation, not by the content, which was actually quite reasonable, but by the speed and nature of the analysis. Daniel had divided territory, assessed strategic advantages, and proposed a partition in less than 15 minutes. That kind of rapid territorial calculation was the domain of military conquest, not peaceful negotiation. Lisa asked what Verath meant. Verath's lights pulsed with what might have been distress. They said that the Galactic Council had been reviewing Earth's historical database, which humans had submitted when joining the Council 15 years ago. Daniel barely slept that night. He kept replaying his presentation in his mind, trying to understand where he had gone wrong. The proposal had been fair and practical. It gave both sides what they needed. Any human negotiator would have suggested something similar. That was the problem, he realized. Any human would have done this. The aliens were not judging the proposal itself. They were judging what it revealed about how humans think. The next morning, Daniel received a formal summons. The senior members of the Galactic Council requested his presence at a closed session. No other members of his delegation were invited. Lisa insisted on reviewing diplomatic protocols with him, coaching him on how to speak, how to move, how to show respect in ways that aliens would understand. Daniel listened but knew that proper etiquette would not solve this problem. The Council did not want better manners from humans. They wanted to understand if humans were dangerous. The closed session was held in a smaller chamber, circular and intimate, 7 beings waited for him, representing the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. Sarashal was there, their feathers now a worried gray. A Kellan elder floated in a tank of special fluid. A Zereth stood motionless, their crystalline body pulsing with slow light. Others Daniel recognized from his briefings, all species that had been part of the council for thousands of years. Also present were 3 beings that looked like floating spheres of golden metal, perfectly smooth and featureless except for a single glowing eye on each. Lisa had told him about these. They were the philosophers of Andros, artificial intelligence created by a species that had gone extinct millions of years ago. The philosophers had outlived their creators and now served as the council's historians and advisors. They were considered the wisest beings in the galaxy, with access to databases spanning eons. Sarashal spoke first, their soft voice somehow carrying authority despite its gentleness. They said the council needed to ask Daniel some questions about human history and nature. They needed honest answers, not diplomatic ones. Daniel agreed, though his stomach was tight with anxiety. He understood this was not really a conversation. It was an interrogation. The question started simple. How many major conflicts had occurred on Earth? Daniel provided the estimates his historians had compiled. Over 500 wars in the last millennium alone, ranging from small regional conflicts to world wars that involved every nation. The council members shifted uncomfortably. The Kellan elders' lights flickered in what might have been distress. How many casualties? Daniel took a breath before answering. Approximately 1 billion human deaths from war throughout recorded history. The 20th century alone saw over 100 million deaths. The numbers were estimates because record-keeping in ancient times was poor, and some wars had killed so many people that exact counts were impossible. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the Zerath spoke, their voice like wind chimes. They said that the entire galactic civilization, spanning 47 species across thousands of worlds, had experienced fewer than 1 million violent deaths in 10,000 years. Most of those occurred in the early days, before the Council established peace. In the last 3,000 years, there had been only 300 violent deaths, and each one was considered a tragedy that shook the galaxy. A single human century was more violent than their entire recorded history, Daniel tried to explain. He said that Earth was a harsh world, that humans evolved fighting for survival, that competition for resources drove much of their conflict. The Council was not interested in excuses. They wanted to understand human military thinking. They asked about strategy, tactics, logistics. Daniel found himself explaining concepts that seemed obvious to him but alien to them. How armies moved and supplied themselves. How wars were planned and executed. How battles were won and lost. Each explanation made things worse. The idea that humans had military academies where people studied nothing but warfare for years shocked them. The concept of professional soldiers, people who spent their entire lives learning how to fight and kill, was incomprehensible. The existence of military theory, of books and classes and entire fields of study dedicated to combat, suggested a civilization obsessed with violence. One of the philosophers spoke then, their voice emotionless and precise. They said they had analyzed the entirety of Earth's military history database. They displayed holographic images showing the evolution of human warfare, compressed into a few minutes of viewing. Primitive humans with clubs and spears, ancient armies with swords and shields, medieval sieges with catapults and crossbows, gunpowder weapons, industrialized warfare, mechanized combat, nuclear weapons. Each advancement came faster than the last, a civilization racing toward more efficient ways of killing. The philosopher noted something particularly disturbing. Humans had not just developed weapons randomly through trial and error. They had created a science of destruction. They studied ballistics, explosives, metallurgy, chemistry, all in service of making better weapons. They tested and refined and improved. Human warfare showed the same systematic innovation that other species applied to art or medicine. Humans had industrialized killing the way other civilizations industrialized food production. Daniel tried to defend his species. He talked about human achievements in other areas. Art, music, literature, science. He mentioned that many technological advances came from the desire to end wars or prevent them. He pointed out that humanity had eventually created organizations dedicated to peace, like the United Nations and later the Earth Council. He said that humans had learned from their mistakes and were trying to be better. Sarashal listened, but their feathers remained gray. They asked the question that cut to the heart of the matter: if modern humans considered themselves peaceful and evolved beyond their violent past, what were they like before this evolution? What would humans be like if they decided peace was no longer worth maintaining? Daniel had no good answer to that. He wanted to say that humans had changed, that they would never go back to their old ways. But he thought about Jack, always assessing threats that did not exist. He thought about how human ships were built with redundancy and armor that seemed paranoid to aliens. He thought about his own presentation, analyzing territory with the mind of a military strategist even though he was supposed to be a diplomat. Maybe humans had not changed as much as they wanted to believe. The session was interrupted when an aide brought urgent news. Lisa had been granted permission to address the council. Sarashal looked surprised but agreed to hear her. Lisa entered the chamber and Daniel felt relief at seeing a friendly face. She looked nervous but determined. Lisa addressed the council with respect but also with the directness that humans seemed unable to avoid. She said she wanted to explain the xenopsychology behind human violence. To help the council understand where it came from, she brought up holographic displays showing Earth compared to other inhabited worlds in the galaxy. Earth had gravity 30% higher than the galactic average. Its weather was more extreme. Its ecosystem was filled with predators, parasites, and diseases that killed efficiently. Humans had not chosen to evolve on a death world. They simply had no choice but to adapt or die. They became persistence hunters because they could not outrun prey. They developed complex brains because they had to outsmart creatures stronger and faster than themselves. They formed tribal groups because individuals could not survive alone. Lisa explained that most galactic species evolved on paradise worlds by comparison. Low gravity, stable weather, abundant resources, few natural predators. They never developed the survival instincts that humans carried in every cell of their bodies. When these species became intelligent and developed technology, they used it to make their already comfortable lives more beautiful. When humans became intelligent, they used technology to survive in an environment that was actively trying to kill them. The problem, Lisa said, was that humans eventually ran out of external threats. They had conquered their environment, eliminated most predators, cured diseases, controlled the weather, but the survival instincts remained. So humans turned those instincts on each other. Tribes competed for resources. Nations fought for territory. The same intelligence that helped them survive nature became weaponized against other humans. The Kellen elder asked a question that seemed to pain them. They wanted to know if humans could ever truly be peaceful, or if violence was so fundamental to human nature that it would always emerge eventually. Lisa hesitated before answering. She said honestly that she did not know. Humans had proven they could maintain peace for generations, but that peace had only existed when humans had common purposes that united them. The corporate wars had ended when Earth faced environmental collapse and had to work together. Earth unified when they discovered they were not alone in the universe. Humans seemed to need external challenges to prevent them from fighting each other. One of the philosophers spoke again. They said they had calculated probabilities based on human historical patterns. If the galaxy remained peaceful, humans would likely remain peaceful as well. But if any serious external threat emerged, humans would respond with the full force of their survival instincts. While Daniel and Lisa faced the council's questions, the rest of the human delegation noticed changes in how they were being treated. Kate tried to engage with delegates she had been building relationships with over the past few days, but they made excuses to leave. Conversations that had been warm and curious now turned cold and brief. Jack observed aliens taking longer routes through corridors to avoid passing near humans. Marcus reported that his engineering counterparts had stopped answering his messages. Jack spent his time watching and analyzing, as he always did. He noticed security measures that had not been there before. Not obvious ones, because the aliens still did not think in terms of physical security. But there were new monitoring devices, subtle changes in access protocols, ways of tracking where the humans went and who they spoke with. The galaxy was afraid, and fear made people cautious even when they did not know how to defend themselves. What the humans did not know was that the full Galactic Council had convened in an emergency session. All 47 species were connected through quantum communication from their homeworlds. The meeting was held without human knowledge or participation. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Council discussed a potential threat to galactic civilization. The session began with a shocking development. The Draxan and Altair, representatives who had supposedly been locked in bitter dispute, announced they had reached an agreement. The Epsilon cluster would be divided exactly as the human had proposed. They accepted the partition immediately and without further negotiation. Their territorial dispute, which had been the entire reason for the summit, was now resolved in a matter of hours. But this was not celebrated as a victory for human diplomacy. Instead, it revealed how trivial the Draxan-Altair dispute had really been. Both species had been willing to compromise all along. They had just been following the slow, elaborate protocols that galactic diplomacy required. The human proposal had not solved anything that would not have been solved eventually. It had simply demonstrated how quickly humans could think in terms of territorial division, resource allocation, and strategic advantage. Now united in concern, the Draxan and Altair presented their findings to the Council. They had done what the humans had called a strategic analysis, but of humans themselves. The results were terrifying. Every human ship, even diplomatic vessels like the Endeavour, was built with military redundancy. Triple backup systems, armor plating that served no purpose in peaceful space travel, engines designed for combat maneuvers. Even human space stations had defensive architecture built into their design. A Varnathi military analyst, one of the few species that still maintained a theoretical military, presented more findings. Human. Colonies were established with clear supply lines and defensive perimeters. Their infrastructure could be converted to military use within days. Their civilian ships could be armed with minimal modification. Everything humans built seemed to assume that conflict was not just possible but inevitable. By contrast, galactic ships were beautiful, efficient, and completely defenseless. They were designed for comfort and fuel efficiency, not survival. Stations were open and welcoming with no thought given to defense. The analyst concluded that a single human military vessel could probably destroy a dozen galactic ships before they even understood they were under attack. Then came the population data, and it made everything worse. Earth had 12 billion humans. Another 3 billion lived in solar system colonies and the few extrasolar settlements. The total galactic civilization, spanning thousands of worlds, had only 30 billion beings. Humans represented more than 1/3 of all intelligent life in the known galaxy, despite controlling less than 1% of settled space. A Kellan demographer presented projections. Human population was growing exponentially compared to the stable populations of other species. Most galactic species had achieved population equilibrium millions of years ago. They reproduced slowly, lived long lives, and maintained careful balance with their resources. Humans reproduced quickly, lived relatively short lives, and seemed driven to expand constantly. Within a century, humans could outnumber everyone else combined. The implications were staggering. If humans decided to expand aggressively, the galaxy could not stop them through sheer force of numbers. Every human world could support populations in the billions. Most alien worlds supported populations in the millions. Humans were not just individually more aggressive than other species, they were also vastly more numerous and growing faster. The philosophers of Andros presented the most disturbing analysis. They had studied human culture through the databases Earth had provided. Human entertainment was filled with violence. Their stories celebrated conflict and struggle. Their religions often featured cosmic battles between good and evil. Their sports were stylized combat. Even human children played war games, pretending to fight and defeat enemies. The philosophers compared this to galactic culture. Alien entertainment focused on beauty, harmony, and emotional subtlety. Their stories celebrated cooperation and understanding. Their religions emphasized balance and peace. Their games tested skill and creativity, not dominance. The contrast suggested fundamental psychological differences. Humans seemed to need conflict narratives the way other species needed food. One of the philosophers posed a question that made the entire council uncomfortable. If humans saw the universe as a place of conflict, Would they eventually create conflicts just to fulfill that worldview? Were humans psychologically capable of accepting a truly peaceful existence, or would they always find reasons to fight? The debate that followed was unprecedented in its urgency. Some species advocated for immediate expulsion of humanity from the Council. Others suggested containment, restricting human expansion to their current territory. A few radical voices even suggested preemptive action, though nobody could articulate what that would mean since the galaxy had not fought a war in centuries. The more moderate voices argued that expelling humans might be worse than keeping them in the Council. At least as members, humans could be monitored and influenced. If rejected by galactic civilization, humans might become hostile. Better to have potential predators inside the community, where they could be watched, than outside where they might become actual threats. Sarashal, speaking for the elder species, tried to find middle ground. They acknowledged that humans were dangerous, but noted that humans had also sought peace by joining the Council. Humans could have remained isolated in their corner of space, building their military and expanding unchecked. Instead, they had reached out, asking to be part of something larger. That suggested humans wanted to be better than their history. The philosophers countered with statistics. Human history showed brief periods of peace, followed by inevitable returns to conflict. The longest peace Earth had ever maintained was 3 generations, and that had only happened when humans faced existential threats that forced cooperation. What would happen when those unifying threats disappeared? Would humans turn on each other again, or worse, on their galactic neighbors? A Zirath philosopher proposed a test. They suggested giving humans a specific role in the galactic community, one that channeled their strategic thinking into productive purposes. Humans could serve as security consultants, helping other species understand threats they were psychologically incapable of recognizing. Humans could be mediators in disputes, providing the decisive thinking that resolved conflicts quickly. Humans could be the voice that asked difficult questions and proposed hard solutions. It was a clever proposal because it gave humans a purpose that satisfied their need to be useful while keeping them engaged with galactic civilization. But it also meant accepting that humans would always be different, always think in ways that made others uncomfortable, always carry the capacity for violence even if they never used it. The debate continued for 2 full days. Every species had a voice. Every concern was heard. The galaxy had to decide not just whether humans could remain in the Council, but what kind of galaxy they wanted to be. One that excluded dangerous species and remained isolated in peace, or one that accepted different kinds of intelligence, even frightening ones, and tried to build something stronger through diversity. Finally, a vote was called. The measure was simple. Should humanity remain a member of the Galactic Council? The voting was not quick. Each species had to consult with their homeworlds, their leaders, their people. The decision would affect the galaxy for generations to come. While the Council debated, the human delegation waited in isolation. They knew something was happening, but not what. Daniel tried to stay calm, but he found himself planning for every possibility. If they were expelled from the Council, what would Earth do? If they were attacked, how would they defend themselves? If they had to flee, what was the fastest route home? He caught himself thinking these thoughts and realized he was proving the aliens right. Faced with uncertainty, his mind immediately went to conflict scenarios. Lisa spent the time writing reports, documenting everything that had happened, analyzing where human first contact protocols had failed. She blamed herself for not preparing, the team better, for not understanding how differently the aliens would perceive human behavior. The Grand Harmony Hall looked different when Daniel and his team entered. The seating had been rearranged so that all 47 species faced a single empty space in the center. It reminded Daniel of a courtroom, with the human delegation standing as the accused. Every delegate was present. Every species was represented. The weight of their collective attention was almost physical. Sarashal stood to address them, their feathers a deep blue that Daniel had learned meant serious formality. They spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. They said the Council had spent 3 days in deliberation. They had reviewed all available information about humanity. They had consulted their historians, their scientists, their philosophers. They had debated every possible course of action. Now they had reached a decision. Before announcing the verdict, Seneschal wanted the humans to understand what the galaxy had learned. They had discovered a species fundamentally different from any other in known space. A species that thought in terms of conflict and competition as naturally as others thought in terms of harmony and cooperation. A species with the capacity for terrible violence and the intelligence to make that violence devastatingly effective. A species that frightened the galaxy not because of what they had done, but because of what they could do. Daniel wanted to defend humanity again, to explain and justify and make excuses. But he realized that was pointless. The council was not wrong. Everything they feared about humans was true. So instead of arguing, Daniel did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He agreed with them. He stood in the center of the chamber and spoke plainly. He said the council was right to be afraid. Humans were dangerous. They carried violence in their genes and their culture. They thought strategically because they evolved fighting for survival on a world that tried to kill them. If there was ever a war between humanity and galactic civilization, humans would probably win, and it would be devastating for everyone involved. He did not make excuses or minimize the threat. He simply acknowledged the truth. The chamber was silent. Delegates shifted in their seats. This was not the defense they expected. Seneschal's feathers flickered with confusion. But Daniel continued. He said that despite all this, despite being dangerous and violent and frightening, humans had chosen to seek peace. They had chosen to join the galactic community. They had chosen to reach out to the stars looking for something better than what they had known on Earth. Daniel explained that human history was not something humans celebrated. Every war memorial on Earth was built to mourn the dead, not glorify the victors. Every weapons museum existed to remind people of what they had survived, not what they had achieved. Humans had learned slowly and painfully that violence only created more violence. They had developed weapons powerful enough to destroy their entire world and then made the conscious choice not to use them. He talked about the corporate wars that nearly tore Earth apart in the 22nd century, how millions died fighting over resources and territory, how humanity looked at the devastation they had caused and decided it was not worth continuing. They created the Earth Council, giving up individual national sovereignty to achieve collective peace. The peace had lasted 3 generations. 3 generations where humans proved they could choose cooperation over competition. Kate spoke next, addressing the council's practical concerns. She acknowledged that human ships and stations were built with military redundancy, but that was because humans planned for failure. They could not imagine building something without backup systems. She admitted that humans thought strategically about territory and resources, but that perspective could be valuable. The Drax and Altair dispute had been resolved in days using human methods, whereas galactic methods might have taken decades. She proposed something radical. What if the galaxy accepted that humans thought differently and used that difference as an asset? Humans could serve as mediators in disputes, providing the decisive thinking that others found difficult. They could be security consultants identifying threats that peaceful species might miss. They could be the voice that asked hard questions and proposed difficult solutions. Humans would be uncomfortable to have around, but they would also be useful. Lisa provided the scientific perspective. She explained that human psychology was shaped by millions of years of evolution on a death world. Those instincts could not be removed or ignored, but they could be channeled. Humans had proven they could direct their competitive nature toward productive purposes like sports, business, and scientific achievement. The same drive that made humans dangerous in conflict made them innovative in peace. She also pointed out something the Council might have overlooked. The galactic civilization had enjoyed 3,000 years of peace, but that peace had never been tested. What would happen if a truly hostile species appeared? One that did not value the Council's ideals. The galaxy had no defense against such a threat, because they had forgotten how to even think about defense. Humans remembered. Humans could protect the civilization they were asking to join. Daniel made a formal pledge on behalf of Earth. Humanity would accept additional oversight from the Council. They would limit their military expansion. They would open their strategic planning to Council inspection. They would accept restrictions on weapons development. They would prove through actions, not just words, that they could be trusted. In exchange, they asked only to remain part of the galactic community and to contribute their unique perspective when needed. The council deliberated for several hours while the human delegation waited. Daniel could see the debate playing out in the body language of the various species. Some remained opposed, their fear stronger than any promises humans could make. Others seemed willing to take the risk, seeing potential value in human membership despite the dangers. The vote would be close. Finally, Sarashal announced the decision. By a narrow margin, humanity's membership in the Galactic Council was confirmed. However, it came with conditions. A joint oversight committee would monitor human activities. Restrictions would be placed on human military development and expansion. Humans would serve in specific advisory roles, but would not have voting authority on military matters. Regular reviews would assess whether humans were honoring their commitments. The vote was not unanimous. 12 species had voted against continued human membership. Another 8 had abstained. But 27 species, including the eldest and most influential, had voted in favor. It was enough. Humanity would remain part of galactic civilization, though on probationary terms. Sarashal explained the Council's reasoning. They recognized that excluding humans might create a greater threat than including them. They acknowledged that human perspective, while uncomfortable, had value. They were willing to take a calculated risk based on humanity's demonstrated desire for peace. But they would be watching closely. Any sign that humans were reverting to their violent nature would result in immediate expulsion. The Peace Summit concluded with a formal signing ceremony. The Draxan Altair partition was implemented exactly as Daniel had proposed. Both species publicly thanked the human delegation for their assistance, though their gratitude was tinged with wariness. The territorial dispute that had brought everyone to Kelvar Prime was resolved in a fraction of the time anyone had expected. As the human delegation prepared to leave Kelvar Prime, other delegates approached them cautiously. Some wanted to learn more about human strategic thinking. Others requested human assistance with long-standing problems their species had been unable to solve. A few even expressed admiration for how humans had handled the situation, facing condemnation with honesty rather than defensiveness. The journey back to Earth was quiet. The team spent their time writing reports and processing what had happened. They had come to a peace summit hoping to prove humanity's value and had nearly lost everything. They had frightened the galaxy and been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about their own nature. But in the end, honesty had served them better than any diplomatic maneuvering could have. Lisa reflected that they had established a new role for humanity, not as equals to the elder species, but as specialists in areas others found difficult. It was not the glorious position humans might have hoped for, but it was honest and useful. Jack noted that while the galaxy feared humans, that fear also granted humanity a kind of respect and influence. Fear was not love, but it was not nothing either. Kate recognized that humans would always be outsiders in galactic civilization. They would never be fully trusted or completely accepted, but they could be valuable outsiders, contributing something no other species could provide. Sometimes being different was more important than fitting in. Daniel spent most of the journey in silence, contemplating the responsibility humanity had accepted. They would be the guardians who remembered what others had forgotten. They would think the dark thoughts so others could remain in the light. They would carry the burden of strategic thinking, of understanding threats, of being the voice that proposed hard solutions when problems had no easy answers. It was not a role any species would want, but it was a role the galaxy apparently needed. 10 years later, the galaxy had adjusted to humanity's presence. Human advisors served on council security committees,